This week, we've got quite the cast of characters on the show today to talk about penetration testing. It is not to be missed. In the enterprise news, which will immediately follow, is Infoblox, Qualys, Twistlock, Dojo by Bullguard, Fortinet makes an acquisition, and Tenable has an announcement. So stay tuned for all that and more on this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
I'm a tiger. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. I don't know how this is going to go because Paul's not here this week, but we're just going to give it a shot.
Even if you've got experience in security, you can benefit from going to somewhere and learning about that bug again. Wearing my tactical turtleneck just for Mr. John Strand, who is on the lines via Skype. John, welcome to the program.
I'm wearing the tactical fleece as well, Paul. This is
Excellent.
A fully, completely, and utterly tactical show.
Improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your security operations with DF Labs security orchestration, automation, and response technology. Automate threat containment, orchestrate incident response, and measure operational performance with DF Labs in-command SOAR platform. Leverage your current security resources to minimize incident resolution time, maximize analyst efficiency, increase the number of incidents handled, and reduce overall risk. In-command SOAR acts as a force multiplier, enabling your security team to do more with less. Streamline the full incident response lifecycle automation process today. Keep your cybersecurity incidents under control with DF Labs. Visit dflabs.com/security weekly and request to see in-command SOAR live in action. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/security weekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Stop attackers from domain credential theft and lateral movement with a 99% success rate by using artificial intelligence to control the attacker's perception of the environment. Javelin Networks is the world's first endpoint intrusion containment platform to protect domain networks. Javelin detects targeted attacks and breaches by obfuscating Active Directory, domain controllers, domain identities, domain credentials, and all domain resources. It only takes one compromised machine to jeopardize the entire organization. Don't be a victim. Visit javelin-networks.com and request a demo of AD Protect today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome, everyone, to episode 94 of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Wednesday, June 6, 2018. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, coming at you live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Quick announcement before I introduce everyone for this show. Make sure you go to se-ri.org on June 16th at Salve Regina University. We will be having a conference on social engineering. Actually, Patrick Laverty and Lee Snyder are hosting it. I will be there presenting, as well as several other smart people that are probably smarter than me, talking about social engineering. We have 2 tickets to give away. And if you send your best meme to psw@securityweekly.com, that meme has to include a picture of Larry and myself. It can include other people, but it has to include Larry and myself. We will pick a winner, and you will get 2 free tickets to SERI, Social Engineering Rhode Island Conference. On the lines via Skype, I'll start with the Security Weekly host, Mr. John Strand, is here with us. John, welcome.
Hey, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Mr. Jeff Mann is here. Jeff, welcome.
A nice little diversion on a sunny afternoon. Nice to be here.
Yes, nice to have you, Jeff. And our special guest for today, we're going to be talking about penetration testing, which is just, a topic we love to talk about. And it's always interesting and evolving. So we've brought together Mr. Dave Kennedy, the founder and CEO of TrustedSec, as well as DerbyCon. Dave, welcome.
Hey there. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Look forward to it.
And Adrian Sanabria, the co-founder and CEO. Is that the right title? Did I get that right, Adrian? Co-founder of Savage Security? Does that sound
I can
good?
be CEO today.
Okay. How's it going, Adrian?
And Director of Research.
There you go. Director of Research, Adrian Sanabria. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start off, obviously we've had a lot of I feel like we've had a lot of discussions about penetration testing. It seems to come up a lot on our shows. John and I did a webcast on the state of penetration testing in the beginning of the year. And even in that short 6-month time frame, I feel like things have evolved. The discussion is constantly evolving. So we brought together this panel to talk about pen testing. I want to give each person an opportunity to basically define what, in your mind, is the best approach for penetration testing in enterprises today. Obviously, this is Enterprise Security Weekly. We focus on the security challenges of those trying to protect enterprises. Since Dave has not been on the show to talk about penetration testing in recent times, I will let Dave go first. Dave, welcome, and talk about your favorite approaches for penetration testing in the enterprise today.
Whoa. So that means I don't get to copy everybody else and use their answers. John, can you call me real quick?
Yeah.
I'm on a Slack channel right now, Dave. So we'll feed things back and forth.
Okay, boy, oh boy. Where do I start? So penetration testing has evolved, I think, a lot over the past few years, especially as we've gotten better at detection in a lot of different companies and organizations. That doesn't mean that's consistent across the board, but I think a lot of the larger organizations have spent a lot more investment on understanding attack patterns and how to get better at it. And so if you look at what penetration testing was supposed to be, it was a way to give insight into how attackers were breaking into infrastructure. What it's kind of changed to today is still a simulation of an attacker, but the understanding that you're not going to spend a substantial amount of time trying to get around monitoring and detective controls. It's really to try to find as many avenues as possible into an environment and provide that to a customer in order for them to be able to understand different ways that they can protect their data that's most critical to them. It's what we call more objective-based penetration testing. One big misconception that I really want to dispel now, and this is that a penetration test does not equal vulnerability scanning. I still hear a lot of people use those interchangeably, and a penetration test does not equal a red team either. So I see that being used a lot interchangeably as well. So if you're using vulnerability scanners as part of your assessment to find as many holes as possible at the starting points of an engagement, I disagree with that approach. I don't think it's valuable to a customer. They can purchase a vulnerability management tool to go and do that for them. It's really to try to simulate an attacker, trying to find as many exposures as you possibly can to get to the objectives and try to build a better security program around that. But that's changing, though, a lot. I think a lot of companies are becoming much more mature in how they're handling things, and the collaboration between people is becoming more and more important. I think you used to walk into companies, hand them a report, and then walking away with all the dust behind you and the buildings that you blew up based on all the attacks that you're able to do. And that caused a lot of animosity with security and IT. And I think you're seeing much more collaborative approaches now with the red team working with the blue team, you call it the purple teaming approach, where you're doing more sophisticated attacks because the basics have been addressed. Things like brute forcing user accounts and not using two-factor authentication on OA and things like that are addressed, the low-hanging fruit issues that we see. And so the need now is to really try to advance our detection in multiple different phases, everything from the initial foothold, exploitation, privilege escalation, lateral movement, post-exploitation scenarios, exfiltration of data, command and control. All those are key pieces now that once you have a basic security posture in place, you can really start to look more at a number of different areas in those different phases of an attack and working with the blue team to build those out and start to get better over time. So it's morphing more into a collaborative approach across the board, and more companies are focusing more on that shift if their program is.
Oh, Dave froze there for a second. Oh, he's still frozen.
Still frozen.
Still frozen. Still frozen. I wanted to make sure he finished his point before I moved on to Adrian.
Felt like he was like 3 words away too.
Yeah,
right there.
I wanted to make sure that we got his, the entire.
He's still monologuing.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Okay, you're back. We wanted to make sure you were finished before we moved on to Adrian. I didn't want to move on to Adrian. What's that, Dave?
Skype hard crashed on me on OSX, like literally just crashed and wanted to send a bug report and everything else. High Sierra is, like, as I mentioned in my Twitter feed, is the Windows ME of OSX.
Yeah,
so
it's bad. It's bad.
Yeah.
So Dave, closing. You sounded like you were getting near the end of your monologue, if it were.
Yeah, my spiel. So just to recap and to close on that and let everybody else talk on this front is that there are many different things that you can do to look at a company's security. There's many things that a company can do to make their security better. And there's a lot of ways to tackle security problems that we face today. But it has to be something that is proactive and that you have people that understand those types of patterns. And I think what you're seeing is that the industry has moved beyond, hey, you have a company that you hire that uses a vulnerability scanner to come in and validate findings, to people that are actually practitioners that understand attack patterns, to do exploitation in all those different scenarios, and working with them on getting better to build more defenses in place. And there's a gap between how long it takes to put protection in place, because you have to go through a lot of different hoops and go through change control boards and things like that, whereas detection can move much faster. And so companies are investing a lot of time and effort into understanding attack patterns and behaviors around that in order to get better at that. And that's what you accomplish with more of the red teaming exercises than you do the traditional penetration tests of how many entry points we can find into the organization.
I'll turn it over to Adrian.
Yeah, so penetration testing is something I've been involved with for a while, and still have a lot of friends run their own consultancies, do pen testing. A lot of pen testers, I talk to on a regular basis. And when I was a pen tester, and with talking with people, even today, I've noticed that there was a few patterns. And they continue, and I haven't really seen much deviation from those patterns. And it's that, first of all, that the pen test tends to be kind of like the default security assessment that you go in and do when the company doesn't know what else to do. Regardless of where they are maturity-wise, how prepared they are for something like a pen test. And, you can start to see where I'm going with this, where we come into a lot of organizations and they never fix stuff, and it was always easy. And, you hear this over and over that, 100% or close to 100% of pen tests, succeed in their goals. It's not really challenging the pen tester even. So I started to think, is it really them? Is it because, they're not taking the report seriously, they're not going through it, they're not fixing things? Or is it us? Could we do this in a different way? Or is there some other consulting engagement we could sell, we could do that would have a higher success rate in getting the business to actually fix some of this stuff? And so I started to study that years ago, and I've kind of gone into it, come back to it over the years. And when I started my own company, with my co-founder, Kyle, we dove into this pretty heavy, and we started trying out alternative engagements. New company, no reason not to try something new. So we started to build what that replacement would look like, and kind of play around with what we thought the issues were with pen testing. And there's some key things that we found. The first was that a lot of the impact of a pen test comes at the very end. What we call the aha moment, when hopefully you get a company to that point where they realize they're really vulnerable, they need to do something. They need to either spend more, focus more. They've got a lot of stuff to fix, and it would be really easy for a targeted attacker or even opportunistic attacks to get in. So that was the first problem, is that comes at the very end when the company's already disengaged. When the pen testers left, you kind of drop that report in their lap. And we found in a lot of cases they didn't know what to do with the report, or the report would mostly contain symptoms of the problem, but not the root cause analysis. Like, just to throw out an example, one of the things that we do now is if they already have vulnerability scans, we'll use that data. We'll use their own scanners. And, just last week, I noticed that one of my current clients, they had everything misconfigured in their scanner. They were actually scanning by domain names, and the domain names, the .com the M was lopped off on every one of them. So it was .co. So all those were, not resolving in DNS, and all those hosts weren't getting scanned that were just misspelled in there. So a lot of little things like this, we find that's the reason there's gaps. That's the root cause of some of these issues is not going to be obvious from a pen testing standpoint. That actually digging into some of these problems, looking at the customer systems, sometimes in a single day, we're able to get a lot of things that are really core to the reason why they're so easy to hack fixed. The same day when we're on site or even remote and working with them. So we kind of taken a different approach here where we try and get that aha moment at the very beginning, as quickly as possible, using sampling, using automation. If we look at the scan for one segment and 6 systems are missing AV, we don't need to scan the other 12 segments. That's already enough of a pattern, enough of an issue that, we don't need to spend extra time diving into that. Also, another thing with pen testing is, typically there are going to be a lot of ways in. Trying to discover 100% of those, I think isn't going to be all that effective. Yeah, there are going to be ways that targeted attacker could get in, ransomware, opportunistic attacks can get in. So I think the bigger question, I think even for a less mature organization is how are they going to handle it when that happens? And, the pen test is actually a good opportunity, and we call it purple teaming, stuff like that, for defenders to practice, to learn how to use their tools, see if they'd actually detect pen testing activities going on. Well, we just decided to make that a default piece of every engagement that we do, along with the pen testing activities, which we still do, though it's more abbreviated. We also do a lot of this breach and attack simulation. Assume somebody's already in, and we're going to score you maturity-wise on how many of those things that you see. Somebody aggressively scanning the network inside, ARP route poisoning. So some of the really obvious stuff that should throw up a red flag, should pop up an alert somewhere that somebody responds to immediately. I think that's pretty basic level stuff rather than, right now we tend to sell it as, well, a more mature organization. We'll see if you notice when a domain admin account is created. I think that's 101 type stuff. That should be at the ground level of some of what we're doing.
I want to go to John.
In the interest of time, I'm going to cede my comments on this because I want to get our guests to come in. And okay. Dave did an amazing job summing it up at the beginning. So let's kick it over to Jeff.
Okay. Jeff?
So in the dark ages, when penetration first started, maybe 25 years ago, and I'm thinking about this because just in the last couple of days, I've been reading up on and listening to some podcasts I found talking about this first coordinated hack that the government did against the armed forces, this little event called Eligible Receiver, which was back in '97, so a little bit over 20 years ago. And at the time, and what it was described in some of the things I've been reading, and it's pretty much true, I think, the penetration test back then was just to try to, it was a shock attack. It was to get the attention of the customer to help them to understand that they were extremely vulnerable to various types of cyber attacks. I agree with Dave that I think those days have gone, and I would certainly hope that nobody is penetration testing these days or engaging companies to perform penetration testing just so they can convince their management that they need to do more. But having said that, I'm sure there are those cases out there, and maybe sometimes that's warranted. The way that I look at penetration testing today and what I think penetration testing should be, and I will throw out PCI because I'm that guy. Two things. One, the penetration testing that a lot of companies have to do, especially at the enterprise level, that I suspect are probably not as mature as the companies that engage Black Hills or TrustedSec. for the work that these guys do. So they're enterprise by definition, but not necessarily terribly mature. They're doing penetration testing because they have a regulatory requirement, whether it's PCI or some other regulation. And so I think one of the evolutions is getting companies beyond the just doing it because they have to, versus what can we do to get some real benefit out of that. I think we've all experienced the pen test, and I think you have it in some of your subsequent questions. How do you deal with customers that you give them a bunch of findings and you come back later and they haven't done anything about it? I actually walked away from penetration testing about 14 years ago because I wanted to take up the challenge of, customers aren't getting the message. They're not changing things, and showing them time and time again how easy it is to break into their environment doesn't seem to be doing the trick. There must be some other way of educating them and getting them to understand this is important, that type of thing. So where I think penetration testing is or should be today is really much more a test, a fire drill of your response capabilities. Can you notice as an organization that something is going wrong in your environment, that there's strange things happening, that there are things that are abnormal, or there's anomalies happening in your network? And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on if you're writing the check or receiving the check, there's almost an unlimited number of things you can do to try to break into a network. Dave alluded to the difference between a pen test and a red team, and what I think the definition of that is, because I'm not sure if there's universal agreement, but red teaming I think involves more than just electronic attacking over the internet or attacking over various signals, wireless and whatnot. But red teaming might be more inclusive of physical compromise and other activities. But gosh, where things are going these days in terms of there is no more network perimeter, there's things in the cloud, there's managed services, Office 365s out there in the cloud. People are doing so much more on personal devices, mobile devices, and they can do it from anywhere. I mean, there's almost no end to the different types of attack scenarios you can come up with. So I think where penetration testing still needs to evolve is working with companies in their specific industries, their specific sort of comfort or risk tolerance level, to try to figure out what are the types of attacks that are most likely going to affect your company, your type of organization, your market. What are you worried the most about? And let's test you to see how well you withstand and hopefully detect those types of attacks that come to you. But I think those are for the few and far between companies. Far more companies aren't ready to do that. So that's why we have this whole industry of companies that are out there running scanners and doing what the members of this panel would consider to be almost not even penetration testing really, or just something less than what a penetration test should be.
Dave,
cool. So I got a question. Just to kind of
John.
throw this out there. We're kind of stepping around it. Is pen testing dead, dying, on its way out? Yes. If so, why?
Well, and I want to give Dave a chance to talk too, as I think Adrian and Jeff presented maybe some different viewpoints. So, Dave?
Yeah, to answer John's question, I think the whole debate on pen testing dead, it comes up every year. I remember a talk in 2007 where it was dead as well, and I think it was a new industry then. I think what we're talking about in a lot of these cases is that is penetration testing progressing, and is it still valuable to corporations? And I guess I have a much different perspective than Jeff and Adrian. Not that what they're saying is 100% accurate or are their own perspectives, but I don't see companies that ignore penetration tests anymore. And when I say anymore, there are definitely exceptions to the rule. There are companies that are just doing it from a compliance perspective. But companies traditionally do want to know what their exposures are, and we're in an industry now, an actual industry that is working to try to get better. And so a lot of the companies that we work with, when we do a penetration test, the next year that we go back, the same issues aren't there. They've gotten substantially better, and it's by working with them as people to get to that point that they understand what the whole purpose of the assessment was. I don't think a penetration test is designed to test incident response. That might be a very small subcomponent of what a penetration test does. You can definitely test incident response as part of that, see how people react to certain things. But what I see penetration testing really being designed for is to simulate an attacker attempting to gain access to your infrastructure from multiple different avenues, so that you can start to build defenses around that and see where you have deficiencies in your security program. So if I break in through 10 web applications, well, we have an SDLC issue where you're not doing secure coding practices. Whereas red teaming is much, much, much different. That's a specialty. Red teaming is 100% building your own tradecraft, doing adversary simulation, understanding threat models, and being able to build threat models based off of capabilities that would target an organization based off of their industry vertical or the type of data that they have. It's working with more advanced companies that have those capabilities in place. And we work with companies that we have to go the 0-day way in. Like, we have to research for 6 months, developing a way to break into their organization because they are that advanced. And so we have a whole dedicated research team that focuses on being able to build out those capabilities, our own custom C2 infrastructure, our own capabilities, our own TTPs that we emulate off of specific attackers. And that's because there are companies that have matured down to that road. Now, it doesn't mean to say that the smaller size companies or companies that don't have dedicated security resources aren't struggling and that they need additional consulting or help or fixes or things like that. They do. They need more hand-holding than other companies that have 10 dedicated resources to security, or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000. So I think what we're all doing is we're saying the same thing, that companies need help, and they continue to need help. And there's a lot of different ways to get help, but it really depends on where you're at in your security program. So, no, I don't think penetration testing is dead. I think it's absolutely valuable to corporations. It's something that our customers get a lot of value off of. John, we swap customers back and forth all the time, and they're super happy with the stuff that you do. I'm sure you're seeing a lot of the same things. I don't want to put words in your mouth. But from a customer perspective, they actually get better. And they get better to the point to where you have to start looking at the tactics, techniques, and procedures of attackers. And it's not adding a domain admin. It's trying to identify where your data sets are at, how to get to that data, and the best avenue as an attacker to get there, and seeing what steps along those phases that we can get identified in, and getting better at detection. Because at the end of the day, I'd rather detect a breach in the first hour, the first minute, and in time is a bad reference point, than 6 months down the road. And that's what those types of things do. But you're not even at a point yet to handle red teaming if you haven't built a maturity model on the penetration testing side.
For enterprises that are out there today, and this is a general question for our panel today, how do you, if I work for an enterprise, how do I gauge my maturity level and help determine what type of test that I might want to embark on that helps me reach my goals and expected outcomes?
That's a great question. I mean, I can take it, or I'll let somebody else talk.
Everybody's going to answer.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, Adrian, and then Dave.
Yeah, so I mean that's. So one thing I didn't mention is when we built a replacement for pen tests, we really built it for, the lowest bars, for the most immature organizations. They're just having their first pen test, and there's this whole slew of low-hanging fruit that you should take care of before you even think about doing something like that. And we felt like there needed to be a service for that. There needed to be something that you would have done, that wasn't vulnerability focused. That would tell you, hey, you should be using laps. Hey, you should understand your data flows. You should understand how your sensitive data flows throughout your organization. Something that would actually give you that maturity score, and give you some kind of prioritized list of, here's all the things you need to do before you even think about simulating adversaries and stuff like that. And you could say, yeah, all they have to do is go the CIS top 20 or something like that. Like, we've got all kinds of guides on how to do that. But we found that people just don't know how to do the fundamentals, or don't know where to start, how to prioritize, or they try and solve these issues by buying products instead of using what they already have. Which there's a lot of good resources out there that people are not taking advantage of. They already own it. It's built into Windows, or it's free or something like that. So, a lot of what we've been focusing on is really on that the immature side. Like, when we give them a maturity score, they get a 1 or a 2 out of 10.
Dave?
By the way, I completely agree with Adrian on that front. I think for companies that are just starting off in a security endeavor, these types of engagements where you're focusing on some of the really high gain things that you can do to make it more difficult. Just simple things like, hey, on your perimeter, put two-factor authentication in, or using something like LAPS for randomization of passwords on workstations and things like that. Those are all great practices to make it, at least set that bar to where they can start to put things in place that make a difference, versus running into a company that's never had a pen test before and saying, hey, I'm just going to smash everything and here's your list of findings, and it puts them very much in a reactive cycle. I couldn't agree more with Adrian on that point.
So is it more what we're advocating for is adversary simulation rather than pen testing or red teaming, or are we just like mincing words?
I don't think it's a matter of advocating one thing or the other. I think it's about providing a range of options from what TrustedSec does to what Adrian does to be able to meet your customer at their maturity of where they're at right now.
I gotcha. All right, sorry, Jeff.
Well, I agree with what John just said, and just sort of to build on that, because I don't think your question was actually answered, which is how do enterprises figure out how mature they are? And Adrian and Dave, and I agree with them, have both kind of expressed the extreme ends of things, which I think we're all comfortable with. But to piggyback on what John says, I think it's a matter of degree, and it's a matter of offering various levels of services. Neither John nor Dave would want to go into a company that's never had a pen test before. It would be kind of silly. Conversely, some of the companies that that they have as their customers aren't going to want a low-end kind of vulnerability scan based, with maybe some Metasploit thrown in to boot type of pen test, because they kind of do that already. So, but to answer your question, how do you figure out how mature you are? I would say, have a pen test done, but hopefully from a company that's able to work with you to gauge your maturity level, at least to see whether you're beyond the sort of the beginner phase. I mean, I think Adrian got in touch with me after we were talking about pen test on Security Weekly some months ago, because I had said something about, if you're a good pen tester, you ought to be able to walk into a company and just have a half an hour conversation with them, a kickoff meeting, and have a pretty good idea how you're going to go after them just based on the conversation. So why not translate that into, hey, we think, based on our conversation, that there's these 20 things wrong in your network. Why don't you go off and double check them before we get started, and then we've got some other things to do. So I think what I'm saying is, I think what all of us are saying is it's a relationship that you need to have with a pen testing group.
And I think that relationship is key, and there's a lot more to it. So let's talk about what are the goals and objectives, and how do you know whenever you've reached your specific outcomes. And I like to look at IT security engineering in many of the same lenses you would look at the structural engineering. Structural engineering requirements for the state of South Dakota are fundamentally different than what they would be in California, which has earthquakes. You would have different building requirements up north as you would, down in Florida. And when you're looking at companies, you have to look at them in very much the exact same way. So whenever you're looking at a very large multinational bank, their specific goals and objectives and what they're going to be looking for any type of assessment, whether it's a vulnerability assessment, pen test, are going to be different than somebody that's in the automotive space. And you've got to be able to adapt to what they actually need from you. And those relationships, like you were just talking about, Jeff, I think are absolutely key, because there is a tremendous amount of complexity in getting to know organizations. There are a large number of pen tests, and Dave, you can speak to this too, where the company's IT staff actually knows very well what the problems are. But sometimes they need an outside firm to come in and articulate those problems and actually demonstrate those problems, to demonstrate that actual real risk for higher ups to actually cause that organization to move forward. So there's a lot of these weird, complex, weird dances that you do at some organizations, and it varies very, very, very much between different market verticals and within organizations within that market vertical as well.
Yeah, I would argue that's a dysfunction of management at that company, but that's definitely a valid point. That's a valid issue. I can't tell you how many times I was brought in, to tell management what, the internal IT people have been already telling them for years.
It might not be dysfunction or just validation that those are the right priorities within a company to kind of focus on. And I think I like to use this analogy because I just went through a bunch of health issues, right? And I don't want to compare us in any way, shape, or form to the medical field, but it applies very much the same for what type of services you need based on the company. And And so I started getting sick. I started getting really bad migraines and headaches. And so I went to the doctors, went to the emergency room because I had really, really bad headaches, and it was causing points where I couldn't even think or anything. That was just super bad, right, on 10 on the Richter scale. So the emergency room is designed to treat a patient's symptoms, okay? So they gave me a migraine cocktail, which numbed me up, and boom, my headache's gone. A week later, I started getting headaches again. Go to the emergency room, same thing, treat my migraines, and they recommend me to a neurologist specialist, okay? And that specialist is looking at my symptoms and saying, okay, you have migraines. Well, they start putting me on medicine and a bunch of other things to try to calm me down. And from there, they start doing CAT scans and start looking at my body and how things are working. And they notice that I have a tumor on my neck, okay? So byproduct of me doing a CAT scan. And then I get a biopsy done, and then it's not cancer, so everything's fine, no issues. But they also find out that, hey, my issues are coming from my jaw because my jaw is misaligned or something like that, causing all these headaches. And lo and behold, I have a night guard now, and everything's perfectly fine. So in this specific case, you want to equate it to the medical field. When you start off in security, you're going to the emergency room. You're trying to figure out where I can fix things very quickly to stop a lot of the problematic symptoms. And then from there, as you do that, and as your program gets better, and as you understand what's wrong with you, you start to build and seek specialists that can help you home in on the actual problems to address them longer term. And that's really where our industry has matured to. You have everything from risk assessments of being able to identify where our key risks are at, mapping those to CSC top 20 and everything else, right? And then you have penetration tests for validation of those and figuring out ways that we can start to build defenses around our environment and start to kick off things like our monitoring detection program, our incident response program, our programs effective, like our secure coding practices and everything else that we've been taught before in the past, and our egress filtering and network segmentation, our cloud computing environments, everything else we do there. But then it comes to a point to where you're in a position as a company where you have a team or you have a third party that you trust, and you want to be able to raise the bar so that maybe instead of just dealing with ransomware campaigns and script kiddies that want to use your machines as crypto miners, that you want to start to look for patterns of behavior. Like, hey, we're going to use application control bypass techniques, or we're going to use command and control that is RFC compliant, where they're using TLS and DNS as methods of exfiltration. So we want to get a little more sophisticated and start to build our detections up so that it raises the bar to make it higher. And at the same time, what starts to happen is our monitoring detection program gets better, our security operations center gets better, our incident response gets better, and all of our other programs that we know where the deficiencies are starting to get better at the time. So it's just a maturity level of different things, and there's different services for each one, as is an emergency room visit, getting a migraine cocktail, all the way to getting a biopsy done to check to see if you have cancer. All different things, very, very similar in approach.
Dave, I like your analogy, and I want to build on it. And one of the things is, my wife works in the medical imaging field, right? And so, like, we don't have CT machines at our homes. Ultrasounds. Well, some people have. There's been, Hollywood actors and actresses that do the home scanning. But not only do we don't have the equipment at home to evaluate ourselves, we don't have the skills of people to run those machines. My wife had to go to school for a couple of years to learn how to run and read and use an ultrasound machine. Is that an extension of the analogy? Like, can people organizations rather do some of this themselves? And what are some of the limitations that you've collectively have noticed in the industry today where you just need to have some kind of specialist come in?
Well, I think to Adrian's point, companies that struggle with penetration tests are like the companies that are looking up WebMD. Mm-hmm. Oh man, I have a migraine, I have cancer, which isn't the case, right? And so it does take somebody that is actually can actually diagnose your problems to help you out. Now, it doesn't mean that. Let's just say a good analogy for the healthcare side is that, well, hey, I have a headache, so I go to a general practitioner, a general doctor that's going to look at my symptoms and be able to look at things. And that's typically where most corporations are at. They may have a general practitioner on staff that can identify and diagnose some basic problems. But when it comes to, oh, hey, I can't treat your migraines based on what I've been prescribing you because you're still having them and you have some other weird symptoms here, you need to go see a specialist. And that's where a lot of hey, I go to school, we do this all the time. We have people that are doing research. We have people that are driving the industry forward. Those are things that are tangible areas where they're not a vulnerability scan, but there's definitely a need for vulnerability scans to help your vulnerability management program and help out the issues there, i.e. a general practitioner, all the way to a brain surgeon. I don't want to compare red teamers to brain surgeons, but just an analogy of a field. Hey, we're dealing with complex systems, complex environments that require us to understand how the brain works, and we're specialized in this area to diagnose areas with the brain. it requires a specialty person to be able to go and do that. And there are definitely companies that have some amazing internal red teamers that are absolutely fantastic. I always try to steal them from customers. They're great.
Right.
But and I'm just kidding, customers. I didn't really try to steal your guys. Just a couple of you. But there's a lot of good things that we can do based off of specialties and areas of practice that the industry is moving forward with, and that's really exciting for me to see.
Yeah. Jeff, and then Adrian. Well, in order. Jeff was raising his hand, so I'll turn it to Jeff and then Adrian.
Yeah, they don't.
I didn't realize we're supposed to raise hands.
Yeah, sorry.
It's just polite. We recognize that.
It's
well
my
done,
little
Jeff.
insider information there. I wanted to say I thought the analogy is great in terms of the healthcare industry, and I think part of the problem that we're trying to address is the fact that in our current day and age with healthcare is not equally available to all. I'm not sure how to maybe build out the analogy who's an enterprise versus people that are on Medicare versus people that don't have healthcare insurance at all. But there's a monetary economic aspect to all this where the expert care is only available to the relative few, which I think we would at least describe as the mature enterprises, those organizations that are have been doing it for a long time because they've had to, which tend to be banks, financial institutions, governments, that type of thing. Whereas there's a whole slew of other companies out there that are by definition enterprise, but they don't have the experience, they don't have the track record. They've only recently become acquainted with security again because of some sort of regulatory requirement, but they just don't have that institutional knowledge on staff. And where do we take the analogy for healthcare should be available to all, and specialist care should be available to all, and where does the analogy fall apart that the highest level of security seems to only be available to those organizations that, from one perspective need it the most, but from another perspective can afford it the most.
I disagree. I really, really, really do, because I see no correlation. And Dave, I want to get your opinion on this, but I don't see a correlation with a strong correlation with the amount of money spent and the security of organizations. And let me clarify. I see organizations that have almost unlimited budgets that have horrendous security. I see organizations that basically are building everything out of open source tools or writing their own tools, but they have 3 amazing engineers that are doing the workload of 10 to 12 people. I think it's not so much funding. I think it's really, there's a tremendous knowledge gap and a passion gap for a lot of people that are actually doing day-to-day security operations. And I see that more of a differentiator than just about anything else.
I agree with that, John. And I was only using the money as an example, not necessarily a root cause.
So Adrian and then Dave.
Yeah. I raised my hand. So I'm going to throw out a different analogy there, and I think the healthcare one might start to break down there, but I think speed is important too, and I think one of the things that I've found, like in John's example, where companies where it's really detached from spending, I think it more has to do with the process of how they secure things and their ability to build a feedback loop where they're able to test deficiencies, find deficiencies, test them, fix them, and then go back through that loop on their own without having to bring an external entity in. And I think that's really important. So this gets back, Paul, to what you're asking about, should people be able to do this themselves? And I think to some extent they absolutely should, because speed, and really, kind of looking at Agile and DevOps, brought this realization on me versus waterfall as an approach to software development. When you're bringing in somebody to do a pen test, if you're really leaning hard on that pen test to tell you what's wrong, but you're only having it done once a year or maybe at most twice a year, it's not a very effective feedback loop. 6 months between reiterating that loop isn't nearly enough. Maybe even on a weekly basis, you need the ability to test yourself, to fail in a safe and predictable way, and then fix things, improve things. So I think it's important for people to be able to run these tests themselves, and those are going to be different tools, I think, than necessarily Metasploit and some of the pen testing tools we use. They can be simpler to test some of these things on the enterprise side, or they can build their own.
And I think to extend the analogy, which normally I'm not a fan of the medical analogy, but in this case it seems to be working well enough for me, which is saying something. So, but if you're going to test yourself, right, you're still going to go to the doctor. So I may weigh myself to make sure I'm keeping my weight down or in a certain range. I may have a Fitbit tracker that's tracking some other telemetry about my health, but I still go to the doctor. So. Dave?
So I have a martial arts analogy. I meant to throw that out there, but say you sign up for martial arts classes. You walk in, Ronda Rousey throws you on the ground and breaks both of your arms, and you get another chance to go back maybe 6 months later after your arms heal, or a year later. Really, if you want to get good at defense, and we do a lot of incident response, there's a lot of firefighting going on. So I think it's an apt analogy. Where it's something that you really do have to practice on a regular basis to get good at it. You can't spar once or twice a year and get good at a martial art.
Sure.
And it's not that different, defending an enterprise, especially when there's new types of attacks and things like that coming out, almost weekly, new ways to exfiltrate data, new ways to hide command and control communications. So I think speed is very important here. The ability to constantly be testing yourself against this new stuff without having to bring in an external company to do that. You still need that validation from the external company, but there's got to be something you can do in between those engagements.
And I do have to own up to something. And this is, whenever I start seeing analogies, like we're all kind of throwing analogies around, I think it boils down to that there haven't been good definitions as far as what is the problem that we're talking about at the moment. And I'm going to take some responsibility for that. And Dave, I'm going to throw you under the bus as well. And I'm also going to throw Chris Nickerson under the bus. Years ago, and actually Paul was there too.
I was there at the first meeting. I brought the bottle of whiskey.
That's right.
That's right. I don't remember much after that. And I really think that it's probably something on our side of the table that we can do better at defining what these different things are. Yeah. And with the penetration testing execution standard, it was something that we set out to try to do. And I think that it worked for a while, but I really think that we need to go back and more clearly define that. So that if we're going to take something out of this, I think taking an action to go back to P-test and saying, okay, this is a vulnerability assessment. This is a penetration test. This is a red team. This is a black team. This is a purple team, and try to put very nice, clear differentiation. Because I agree with Dave. If you're running a scanner and you're saying that that's a pen test, that's a problem. That is a massive, massive problem. And we need to clearly identify what that is and what it isn't. And I think that would be helpful for a lot of companies, not just our customers that we work with all the time.
Yeah. So
we did talk about doing those.
Hold on. I know Dave has to go. I know we're a little pressed for time. I just want to give Dave a chance to talk, and then I'll pass it around.
That's this way. I love you, Paul.
I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to make sure we're balanced. I thought I did a pretty good job.
Let me see, Adrian, Jeff. So listen, I think the analogies have been pretty good up to this point, and I think they kind of show from different industry verticals what we're trying to accomplish. Companies have varying levels of risk in what they want to invest in. Security is not the most important thing for a business, period. It's not. It's making money is the most important thing for a business. Security is used as that guise of, well, hey, if everything gets hacked, you're going to lose and you're going to be out of business, when we've rarely seen that actually happen. So the question comes down to, what is the level of risk that we're willing to accept as a business, and what are the things that we can do to reduce that risk? It's the same thing in the medical field. And I hate to use another analogy. Sorry, John. But I got told from my biopsy that there's less than a 1% chance that it's cancerous. So there's still a chance that it's cancerous. So do I remove my entire thyroid to reduce that 1% risk, or do I get once a year a checkup just to make sure that, hey, I'm doing things appropriately, or that it hasn't grown, or that it's not exhibiting any signs of cancer? And that's what penetration testing is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a validation that we're focusing our right priorities on different things, and that we have programs designed to try to deflect these things from happening. And there might be deviations of those that we need to identify so that we can get better at it. I'll use the example of web applications. If we have an SDLC and our developers are making and cranking out some awesome secure code using agile methodologies and all this other stuff, and we have source code and analyzers and all this other stuff that's going in, and we have this program that's great, but then marketing goes out with a third-party company that they paid the least amount for, and all of the stuff has holes in it. Well, that's a problem in our process that we have to validate, and we wouldn't discover that unless we're using penetration testers. So it's ways of finding deviations in our programs, ways of finding exposures that we may have missed as part of our normal data. It's just a validation of what we're doing and is it right. It's the same thing that we do to try to reduce risk in cancer or reduce risk in what we're doing. Everything that we do in life is based off risk. If I get in an elevator, yes, there's a chance that the elevator can fail and I can die, but what are the statistics of that? So we have to focus on likelihood and probability and the impact that it has to the organization and what we're focusing our priorities on to reduce that risk. And that's where that technical validation comes into place, because if you just do a risk assessment and say, well, hey, I'm going to look at your policies and I'm going to look at you and interview and install laps or something, not to use Adrian's point there, to use laps, well, they may have a wide open VPN that has a username and password of admin, but you would never find that unless you're going through and doing validation of testing. And that's important to understand.
Closing thoughts from anyone else?
I've got a bunch of thoughts that we could keep going, but I know we're pressed for time. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. I took away two different things that I think is more of a request to go along with what John was saying of the pen test community. I would, and I don't know if this exists, and if it does, please send it to me, but some type of self-assessment for a company that helps them understand what type of test might be best for them or where they are in their maturity level, which will then help them define maybe what type of test they need. I think you also need to follow it up with defining some of the different levels of testing and then creating a mapping based on the results of some kind of self-assessment. I think that would be super helpful. I would certainly support that. And we may have some of that today and certainly, point us in the right direction.
I think there is those types of assessments. There's a lot of companies that will perform, and we do the same thing. I'm not trying to put myself in this. That's not the goal. But there are program maturity assessments that focus on where your security program's at, and it does go through validation of testing as part of that to say, okay, well, we think we're here. Let's validate that and find out where you're at. I think Adrian hit on it too. Let's look at your maturity assessment. He talked about the whole maturity assessment process at the beginning of saying, okay, well, you're at a level 1. Here's your top priorities based on your organization structure, the amount of funding you have, your organization as a whole, and where you really are concerned about losing data. And here's the things that we should focus on from a risk perspective to reduce those. And here's the types of tests or the types of actually addressing fixes that need to occur to reduce those risks. So there are things that you can do, as in going to a general practitioner and saying, hey, what's wrong with me? And a general practitioner say, well, hey, you're doing all these things great. Your cholesterol looks great, but I'm noticing some things off here. Maybe you need to take some vitamin D supplements. And sorry to keep using the medical analogy. It's just I'm all on the medical kick. I literally had a medical appointment this morning, so I'm on that point. But those are things that can help benefit a company to really try to build and be more proactive in what they're doing.
Awesome.
I'll say that our industry as a whole, I think, struggles with what Dave was saying just a little bit ago about, he's got a 1% risk of the thing in his neck being cancerous. We struggle to look at the maturity of an organization or look at the state of an organization and provide any type of meaningful, and maybe these things we've just been talking about would prove me wrong. I haven't seen them, but we struggle with really telling a company, this is what we think your risk is, that's based on some kind of meaningful measure that's enforceable and doesn't come back to bite you 6 months later when they get popped.
So
adding on that, I think one of the things that penetration testing I think also reflects the industry and how we've tended to focus on preventative controls and trying to close that gap of could something get in, could someone get in, and we haven't spent enough time paying attention to, okay, what happens when they do get in? Will we detect them? How resilient are we to what they're going to do? How well can we recover, and how fast can we recover? And I think that's especially clear now with ransomware being a big thing, where you really do want to know, how much you're going to lose, whether or not you're going to pay a ransom, that may not even work, and how quickly you could recover and whether you can recover. Do you test backups and stuff like that? So ransomware in this weird way is kind of, I think, brought a lot of the old school, thoughts and approaches to holistic security together to where, disaster recovery is now kind of top of mind in a way that it hasn't been before, because this ransomware is taking away your data as the leverage to get you to pay.
So, but is it holistic? I'm sorry, Paul. Is it holistic security, or is it just good IT?
Both.
Well, I'd argue a lot of security stuff is really just good IT. Yeah. I don't think we should run vulnerability scans for the rest of the organization. I think they should run it on their own stuff, and they should, the Windows admins should be the chief people worrying about pass to hash and lapse and all that. That shouldn't be a security role.
So what we established was Jordan's the best basketball player, Brady's the best quarterback, and Wu-Tang.
Whoa.
Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, best hip-hop album of all time. All right. With that, we're going to take a short break and come back with the enterprise security news.